Radha Madhava Punjabi Hari Jaya Radha Madhava Punjabi Hari Jaya Gopidana Vallabha Devadhari Jaya Gopidana Vallabha Devadhari Asura Nandana Garjana Ranjana Asura Nandana Garjana Ranjana Jamuna Thera Vanachari Yamuna Thera Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Punjabi Hari Jaya Radha Madhava Punjabi Hari Jaya Gopidana Vallabha Devadhari Jaya Gopidana Vallabha Devadhari Asura Nandana Garjana Ranjana Asura Nandana Garjana Ranjana Jamuna Thera Vanachari Yamuna Thera Vanachari Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Kanjogandi ki jai, Konrad Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Gopalandi. Oh, glory some of the devotees, oh, glory some of the devotees, oh, glory some of the devotees, oh, glory to Shri and Shri Gauranga. So, today we are speaking on Canto 3, Chapter 1, Text number 9. Om Namah Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namah Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namah Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Iracha Pata Pahita Sabayam Jagat Guru Yani Jagada Krishna Natani Pumsam Amrichayananai Rajaru Mene Chatta Punyalesaha Yada Chapata Prahita Sabayayam Jagat Guru Yani Jagada Krishna Natani Pumsam Amrichayananani Rajarumena Chatta Punyalesha Yada Chapata Pahita Sabayam Jagat Guru Yani Jagada Krishna Natani Pumsam Amrichayanini Rajarumena Chatta Punyalesha. Yada, when, cha, also, pata prahitaha, being advised by Arjuna, sabayam, in the assembly, Jagat Guru, of the teacher of the world, Yani, those, Jagada, went, Krishna, Lord Krishna, na, never, tani, such words, pumsam, of all the men of sense, amrita anani, as good as nectar, Raja, the king, Dhritarashtra or Duryodhana, Uru, very important, Mene, did consider, Chata, dwindling, Punyaleshaha, fragment of pious acts. Translation per Lord Krishna was sent by Arjuna into the assembly as the spiritual master of the whole world, and although his words were heard by some, like Bhishma, as pure nectar, it was not so for the others, who were completely bereft of the last farthing of past pious works. The king, Dhritarashtra or Duryodhana, did not take the words of Lord Krishna very seriously. Please repeat. Lord Krishna was sent by Arjuna into the assembly of the spiritual master of the whole world. And although his words were heard by some, like Bhishma, as pure nectar, it was not so for the others, who were completely bereft of the last farthing of past pious works. The king, Dhritarashtra or Duryodhana, did not take the words of Lord Krishna very seriously. Purport. Lord Krishna, who is the spiritual master of the entire universe, accepted the duty of a messenger and deputed by Arjuna, went to the assembly of King Dhritarashtra on a peace mission. Krishna is everyone's Lord, yet because he was the transcendental friend of Arjuna, he gladly accepted the role of messenger, exactly like an ordinary friend. That is the beauty of the Lord's behaviour with his pure devotees. He reached the assembly and spoke about peace, and the message was relished by Bhishma and other leaders because it was spoken by the Lord himself. But due to the exhaustion of the pious results of their past deeds, Duryodhana, or his father Dhritarashtra, did not take the message very seriously. That is the way of persons who have no credit of pious deeds. By past pious deeds one may become the king of a country, but because the results of the pious acts of Duryodhana and company were dwindling, it became evident from their actions that they were sure to lose the kingdom to the Pandavas. The message of Godhead is always like nectar to the devotees, but it is just like the opposite to the non-devotees. Sugar candy is always sweet to a healthy man, but it tastes very bitter to someone suffering from jaundice. So this chapter entitled Questions of Vidura, so he's presenting them, presenting to Maitreya, I think. Yeah, Saint Maitreya and His Grace Maitreya, Vidura and His Grace Maitreya Muni. So many different questions there. So we're hearing that Krishna, he was acting as the messenger for Arjuna. Of course, we also know he took the role of a chariot driver for Arjuna, Parthasarathi. So even though he promised he wouldn't participate in the Battle of Kurukshetra, he agreed to become the chariot driver. Generally, the chariot driver is like a lowly position. And many descriptions in Battle of Kurukshetra, you hear that the chariot driver gets targeted first by the opposing force. Because if you kill the chariot driver, you stop the chariot, and then the warrior in the chariot becomes an easier target. So, but nevertheless, Krishna took that role, and here we're hearing he took the role of messenger, that he went to the opposing camp, the Kauravas, and as on a peace mission to try to stop the war. Of course, ultimately we can understand it's Krishna's mission or Krishna's desire for the battle to take place, because he wanted the saintly king Yudhisthira on the throne, so that the kingdom would be ruled according to religious principles, and the demoniac influence of Duryodhana and others were removed from power. But nevertheless, one reason we can understand that, it's very often we hear that people like to blame God for everything. If something good happens in their life, they don't thank God, but if something bad happens, then they blame him or condemn him. So in one sense, he performed this peace mission so that people couldn't blame that, well, actually, you're the one who arranged this whole battle, it's all your fault, like that. So you can say, no, I went on a peace mission, I tried, I tried to bring peace to both sides, but the Duryodhana and Dhritarashtra, they weren't cooperating, they didn't want to listen, like that. So that's many reasons there, but nevertheless, over and above that, we can say that because Krishna felt so indebted to his devotee Arjuna, he was happy to carry out what appeared to be like menial activities on behalf of his devotee. So we have the 5 different rasas between the devotees and Krishna. The shanta or neutral stage, generally exemplified by, sometimes mentioned, Krishna's flute and the cows, and also perhaps the desire trees. So it's like a neutral stage. There's no real deep activities or devotion there, but there's still reverence in a sense towards Krishna. And above that is Dasya Ras, or servitorship. So who is that exemplified by? Ideal example in Ramayana? Hanuman, Ki Jai. So he's considered the ideal servant of the Lord. And above that is Sakya Ras, so friendship. So we're hearing here Arjuna is the ideal example for that. Above that is Vatsalya Ras, or parental. Who's the ideal example? Yasoda and Yasoda and Nanda Maharaj particularly considered. Whilst Devaki and Vasudeva, they're also in the same rasa, Vatsalya Ras, but it's considered they're on a lower level in one sense, that they were able to see, witness the appearance of Krishna, but he appeared in his majestic form, forearm form. And as soon as he agreed to take on his childhood form, immediately, he was taken away by Vasudeva, and they weren't able to witness his childhood pastimes, which is considered the most sort of intimate sort of pastimes between, the parents and the child. So therefore, both parents are considered Vatsalya Ras, but Mother Jasoda and Nanda Maharaj are considered on a higher level because of their special position of witnessing Krishna's childhood pastimes. And the highest ras is Madhura Ras, or conjugal. Who's the ideal example for that? Radharani and the gopis. The gopis headed by Radharani. So these are the 5 different. So everybody has these as pure spirit soul. We all have our individual relationship with Krishna in one of these rasas. So as we develop in spiritual life, it's understood that slowly we develop a particular mood in serving Krishna, in relating to Krishna. And we may become attracted to a particular devotee who's sort of the ideal example of serving in that particular mood. Like coming from Lord Chaitanya's teachings, it's becoming in the mood of the gopis, serving in separation. And so if we want to enhance that mood, we follow in the footsteps of the gopis, take on that sort of mood as the servant of the servant. That video that accompanies the sham dance, that song by Gaurangi, and she sings that song, and there's a dance that's put together. Everybody familiar with that? No? Lots of blank faces? Okay, so anyway, the whole song is about a conditioned soul coming into the association of Radha and Krishna. So she embraces Krishna, and then immediately one of the gopis takes her away and gets her to make garlands for Krishna. So immediately she's placed into service, the servant of the servant. So that's the role, and that's Lord Chaitanya's teachings, is dasana, dasana, dasa, the servant of the servant of the servant. Not that we're just hanging around in Krishna's entourage, just sort of bathing in his presence, but we're actually serving Krishna like that. So in our particular disciplic line, that's that's sort of the mood that we're being trained up in. And so somehow or other, I guess due to good fortune, perhaps due to previous pious activities, we've been led into this particular position now, that we're within this disciplic succession and we're developing that mood more and more. So when we're hearing about Krishna's pastimes, Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavatam, it's not simply like we might just read a book and say, oh yeah, it was a nice story, and then just put it away and we carry on with our lives. But Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavatam, Krishna Leela, it's like absolute transcendental activities, and we can sort of enter into that. You can use the example to understand that in a cricket game you have a sports commentator and he's watching from the sidelines with his binoculars and he's making a commentary on what's happening. So at one point the commentator may say, oh, he's out. The batter's out. So that doesn't necessarily mean that he's out, it's just a commentary based on his observation. But when the umpire of the cricket game said he's out, then he's definitely out. So the difference between the two, from a grammar point of view, the commentator says he's out, that's called descriptive speech. He's just describing what he's seeing. But the umpire, when he says he's out, it's a performative speech. When he says something, it actually happens. So another example is if you're at a wedding and the groom puts a ring on the bride's finger, and one of the wedding guests, they're married now, they're husband and wife. But that doesn't make them husband and wife, that's just an observation. Once again, it's descriptive speech, they're just describing what they're seeing. But when the minister says, I now pronounce you husband and wife, that means they're actually legally married. So that's performative speech. So just using grammar as a particular example, the performative speech makes the action a reality. So when we hear Bhagavad Gita or Bhagavatam and we hear Krishna says he's supreme, so the absolute nature of his statement, using this example, this is performative speech. It's not, if anybody else says I'm supreme, we just don't take any notice. But because Krishna is the supreme person of the Godhead, by saying that, it makes it reality. So we can directly connect with Krishna by hearing his pastimes through that, what we can say, performative speech, or that transcendental lila. So it's just a bit of an example to understand that people can say so many things, but if it's performative speech, it means from a spiritual point of view, you actually enter into that lila. It's not simply hearing just a mundane story, but you can actually enter into that lila from a spiritual perspective. So we're also hearing about particularly Dhritarashtra and Duryodhana and their entourage, that their pious result, the pious results of their past deeds are dwindling. So particularly the word is given punya leshaha, which Prabhupada translates as fragments of pious activities, or fragments of pious acts. So it's something similar, I guess. It's understood that due to past pious activities, a person may be elevated to the heavenly planets in the next life. But they're only staying there for as long as those punya is still valid or current. Once that pious activity runs out, that's the end of their residence in the heavenly planets. From there they come back to the earth, the earthly realm, and basically start again in that sense. So it's like Prabhupada says, up and down. You can go up the heavenly planets, go down to the hellish planets, up and down, according to your activities. So one is released from that cycle of birth and death only when they engage in spiritual activities. So it is actually described that there's 3 different types of pious activities, also known as sukriti. So in Chaitanya Charitamrita Madhya Lila 22.45, we hear that by good fortune one becomes eligible to cross the ocean of nescience. When one's term of material existence decreases, one may get an opportunity to associate with pure devotees. By such association, one's attraction to Krishna is awakened. So Prabhupada mentions in the purport, quoting from Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, that there are 3 different types of sukriti. So he describes them that number 1 is known as Bhoga Unmukhi Sukriti, sometimes also known as Kana Unmukhi Sukriti. So this gives material opulence and enjoyment, and also possibly higher planets in the next life. So it's auspicious activities like, it's material activities, but auspicious activities like giving in charity, opening hospitals, philanthropic, altruistic activities. So activities in the mode of goodness basically can be described as Bhoga and Mukhi Sukriti. So it's you're increasing your amount of pious credits. It's not spiritual, but it's material, and one will benefit materially from it. So the second one, known as Moksha Unmukhi Sukriti, that this gives impersonal liberation, enabling one to merge into the existence of the Supreme. This is attained through piety derived from the cultivation of knowledge, like sastric knowledge, and therefore it is sometimes called Jnana Mukhi Sukriti. So, of course, this word moksha, it's very, in some circles, it's quite misunderstood. But basically, I asked Banu Swami specifically about this point, moksha. What does this actually mean? So he described there was 2 types of moksha, one for Vaishnavas and one for impersonalists. So for the Vaishnava, moksha means entering into the Vaikuntha planets. This is liberation, eternal liberation, moksha. Of course, above moksha is also prema. To get to Goloka Vrindavan, prema is required, but moksha is the Vaikuntha planets. But for the impersonalist, moksha means entering into the Supreme Brahman, into the Brahman. So 2 different types of moksha there. So in this case, moksha unmukhi sukriti is entering into the Brahman through piety gained from cultivation of sastric knowledge. And lastly is bhakti unmukhi sukriti. So this awakens one's dormant Krishna consciousness. Devotional activities like hearing, reading about Krishna, serving his devotees. Sometimes this can be unknowingly performing these activities. Somebody stops you in the street and sells you a book, and you give some money for it, or when we have Harinams, a lot of people just sort of join in. Everybody likes to dance and sing, and so they see the devotees and they join in there. Or a Rath Yatra is passing, and they might join the procession. So bhakti and mukhi sukriti. So this awakens one's dormant Krishna consciousness, and is considered the most auspicious of the pious activities. So Prabhupada mentions in the purport that if we're performing this bhakti sukriti, knowingly or unknowingly, it can either attract Krishna consciousness to our life, like we happen to meet a devotee, or maybe a friend invites us to a temple, or we join in a Harinam, or Rathi Yacha, something like that. So, or you take prasad, whether it's knowingly or unknowingly, there's going to be some benefit there. Or we can become attracted to Krishna consciousness, perhaps we've developed pious credit from previous life, and somehow or other we're just attracted. We see a devotee and there's a natural attraction there. Jayapataka Maharaj, he said the first time he saw devotees was in a park in San Francisco, and he just saw them, sitting down and playing and instruments, singing, and then one of the devotees turned around, looked at him, and the Jayapataka Maharaj, he said he saw the tilak, and somehow or other, just seeing that tilak had such a intense reaction in him that what he did was just turned around and ran flat out. And after a kilometre or two, he said, "What am I doing?" And he just couldn't understand that reaction. He went back and the devotees were gone. It was a few weeks or so before he, contacted them again. But, somehow or other, from a past life, you're just attracted to something like that. I think Prabhupada mentioned to Ravi Shankar. Ravi Shankar, he's passed on now, but he was considered the most expert sitar player in the world. It's considered the most difficult instrument to learn. So Prabhupada told him that to be expert in sitar takes 5 lifetimes. You've been playing for 3 lifetimes. So you could imagine he spends his whole life playing the sitar, and then the next life, like he's just a little toddler walking around the house and there happens to be a sitar in the house. What's he going to do? He's just going to run over, he's just going to embrace it practically, because the last few lifetimes he's just absorbed in that sitar. So similarly, we've had some attachment or attraction experience with devotional service previous lives. When we come in contact with it again in this life, there's going to be some natural attraction. So that's the result of this bhakti anmukhi sukriti. So Prabhupada goes on the purport that pious activities are fortunate when they help one become Krishna conscious. The good fortune of bhakti anmukhi sukriti is attainable when one comes in contact with the devotee. By associating with a devotee, knowing or unknowingly, one advances in devotional service, and thus one's dormant Krishna consciousness is awakened. So, we're not talking about devotional service in itself, but it's pious activities that attracts us to Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada goes on, bhakti ultimately resides originally with Krishna, but this bhakti is kept within the heart of the pure devotees. By their causeless mercy, they will distribute this bhakti to the conditioned souls. So that's the understanding that, where does this bhakti come from? Bhakti is residing in the heart of the pure devotees and they distribute it to others. So whilst the origin of bhakti is Krishna, he's somewhat impartial, that, he's sort of equal to everyone. But the devotees are in a sense more merciful than Krishna because they take so much pains and difficulty to go out and try to give bhakti to others. So this is considered the level of Madhyamadikari, that they're discriminating in a sense. They avoid the impious, the demoniac, but they look for the pious and the innocent. And, they just try to distribute Krishna consciousness to anybody who's willing. So through developing this bank of pious activity within the heart, slowly it purifies the heart, and gradually Haladini Shakti, exemplified by Srimati Radharani, begins to manifest within the heart of one who's becoming purified. So also, due to that, as we've mentioned, one comes in contact with devotional service one way or another, Krishna consciousness, there's some automatic attraction there. So we have in Chaitanya Charitamrita that verse that Brahmananda Brahmate Guna Bhagavan Ajiv Guru Krishna Pashada Paya Bhakti Lata Bij, that the conditioned soul is wandering life after life through all the Brahmanandas, all the universes. But if they're very fortunate, they can come in contact with Krishna consciousness, and therefore the Bhakti Lata Bij, the seed of devotion, becomes fructified, like a gardener putting a seed in the soil. So if it's barren, if the soil is barren, there's no water, no sunlight, that seed will just sit there. But if it's in a favourable position, it's fertile soil, and there's rainwater and sunlight, that seed will fructify. So you can sort of understand this Bhakti Lata Bij is faith. It's faith dormant within the heart. But if the jiva comes into contact with in a favourable situation, then that seed, that faith, will fructify into devotional service. So one example of this Bhakti Mukhi Sukriti is one story that this thief was wandering, trying to find things to steal at night. And eventually he became tired and he looked for a place to sleep. And he come across his doorway. It was sort of dark, he couldn't see much, but there's this sort of doorway here. And he thought, I'll just sleep here tonight. But it was very dusty. So he took off his chadar and he just sort of, wiped, cleaned the doorway like that, and then lay down to sleep. So he didn't realise it was actually the doorway of Krishna's temple. And from his point of view, he was just cleaning some dust so he could take rest. But Krishna considered, this man has cleaned my temple. And so in the next life, this person became a pujari in that particular temple and was able to continue with his Krishna consciousness. So this is an example of Bhakti Mukhi Sukriti, that even unknowingly, if one performs some service for Krishna, Krishna is recognising like that, and he gives the opportunity. And there's one story from an opposite point of view, that in the Ramayana, every kingdom or every king, they would establish in the palace or on the outside of a palace a bell, and there was always a minister there sort of standing by the bell. So if anybody in the kingdom had any complaint or issues to present to the king, they could go and ring the bell, and there would be an attendant there to pass on their issues. So it was sort of considered very prestigious if during your whole reign as a king that bell was never rang. It meant that the citizens were very happy. There was no complaints. Anyway, during Ram's reign in Ayodhya, one time the bell rang, and they were very surprised. Everybody should be completely satisfied in Ram Raj. But so the minister went to see who was ringing this bell, and there was a dog. A dog had rung the bell. And so the minister, so what's going on? So somehow or other the dog was able to speak. And the dog said, I was just minding my own business, lying on the street, and this man come along and kicked me. How is this happening in Ram's kingdom? And so they took it very seriously, that the message was passed on to Ram, and Ram himself came out. And when he understood the situation, he asked his ministers, go and find this man who kicked this dog. So eventually the man was found and was brought in front of Ram, and so Ram asked the dog, so what do you want to do with him? And the dog said, you should make him the head priest. And everybody was surprised. He just come along and kicked you, and you want him promoted to be head priest. So why is that? And the dog said, well, in my last life I was the head priest, and I become very proud and arrogant. I was stealing money, and I was doing so much nonsense. Now in this life I've taken birth as a dog. So now you should make this man head priest. The dog thinking the same thing will happen to him. So anyway, so the point is that even if we're put in a what we considered a very favourable situation for Krishna consciousness, if you misuse that, then you lose, your pious credits. So this was the understanding with Duryodhana and company. That, of course, there's also the story of I might have mentioned before of just understanding how when your pious credits are running out, and there's seemingly so much ill fortune is happening in one's life. So at the end of the Battle of Kurukshetra, the 100 sons were killed of Dhritarashtra, and and Dhritarashtra, he was lamenting all his life that he was born blind. Actually, he could have been the rightful heir, but because he was blind, Pandu, took the throne. So he was lamenting in so many ways that at one point he took the opportunity to speak to Krishna. And in a very sort of, sorrowful way, lamenting, he said, "So Krishna, why did this happen to me? Why was I born blind? Why did I lose all my 100 sons?" So Krishna explained, well, 50 lifetimes ago, you were a hunter and you shot a flaming arrow into a nest of birds. And there was 100 young birds in that nest, and they were burnt in that fire. But the mother bird, she was able to escape, but the flames blinded her. So Dhritarashtra could understand, okay, 100 sons, been born blind. So, but then he asked Krishna, but that was 50 lifetimes ago. Why is this happening to me now? And so Krishna said it took 50 lifetimes to accrue enough piety to be awarded 100 sons. Like that. So there's one story from Mahabharata. So, all these things are going on. We don't realise that, like the story of the thief. He was just cleaning some random doorway to lie down, but actually Krishna recognised he's cleaning my temple. So, anything we're doing for the pleasure of Krishna, so many, benefit we're receiving from it, whether we realise it or not. So, of course, beyond this Socrates is devotional service. So ultimately for devotees, we're beyond this Socrates. We might have received a lot of this Bhakti and Mukha Socrates to come to devotional service, but once we engage in devotional service, we're not talking about Socrates or pious activities. We're talking about, pure Bhakti. That's the level that we're acting on. So perhaps we'll end there. Thank you very much. Is there any questions or comments at all? Yes, Rukmini. Just get the mic. Yes.
I was just thinking how when we go on the pilgrimage, sometimes when we take a bath in the holy places, that can destroy the pious and the impious. Activities that we performed. So not only is the impiety destroyed, but also the good karma and so aspects become fully purified.
No, that's true. It's understood that even pious activities, it in one sense impels us to take birth again to receive the reaction from that. So even, so we're not striving for pious activities, we're striving devotional service. So it's a good point. Thank you. Yes, Roger.
Yeah, one question is that I was convinced that even to enter Vaikuntha you need prem. But you said we don't need prem, that's just to enter Goloka.
That's the understanding I had. I mean, it's when I asked Banu Swami about this, what does moksha mean? Because you get a lot of different interpretations. So he explained that moksha means entering into the Vaikuntha planets, but beyond moksha is prema. So that was the explanation he gave.
Because my understanding is that there is bad and there is prema. And in bad, you can still fall down. Like for example, Maharaj Bharat, he was in the state of bad. He fell down. So, yeah.
But see, I mean, even in these situations, you can keep progressing as well. I mean, one devotee asked Prabhupada, he said, even if we're in the heavenly planets, can we still, continue with our spiritual life? Can we go from the heavenly planets to the spiritual planets? There's a question like that. And Prabhupada, he said, yes, spiritual life is not static, it's ecstatic. So it was just a play on words, but basically the point was, wherever you are, you're not necessarily stuck in one place. According to your desire, you can continue.
Thank you. And another one is, you were mentioning how the story about Peter Lastra, questioning why he was born blind and everything. So I was just thinking how even people who got in close contact with Krishna when he was on the earth, they were under the effects of karma. But sometimes in ISKCON we think that everything that's happening to us is directly Krishna and we are beyond karma. So I just wondered if you could explain a little bit like the life of the devotees, that they are not Uttamadhikaris. Is it affected by karma as well? Is it a mixture?
Well, that's the understanding that when you take up devotional service, Krishna personally takes charge of your life. That doesn't mean that automatically you're pure devotees. Like Prabhupada explains that you take up devotional service, that the fan of karma is switched off. But it's not that the fan stops immediately. Still, there may be some residual reaction, but in a devotee's life, you shouldn't think that's ordinary karma. It's just Krishna's arrangement to teach us certain lessons we need to learn. But that's the understanding that we take up spiritual life. Krishna is taking personal, care of our lives. He's taking charge of our lives. But it depends on what level, there's mixed, karma, misra, bhakti, it can be mixed. So according to the level that we're acting on in our consciousness, it may be mixed, the desire may be mixed. But generally speaking, as one takes up devotional service, Krishna takes personal attention to one's life. Yes.
I once heard this nice explanation that Krishna may use our karma. I once heard this nice explanation.
How do you switch it on?
That Krishna uses our karma and he may adjust it a little bit.
Just got devotees outside. Sorry, Mataji. Yeah, sorry.
So I once heard the nice explanation that Krishna may use our karma and adjust it a little bit just to teach us.
Sure.
He uses and modifies it a little bit.
Sure.
It's also a nice way to understand.
No, it's a very complex thing. Prabhupada said, the law of karma is so intricate you can never properly understand. But generally speaking, Krishna takes charge of a devotee's life, and whatever happens in their life, it's not just ordinary material karma, it's Krishna's special arrangement.
And I was just wondering in the same way, like he was saying, sometimes devotees go through really hard times. They may have horrible family situations, they may have a bad accident, whatever. But somebody who's really nice would see that as Krishna's mercy, whereas perhaps somebody else might just think, oh my God, why's this happened to me? I don't deserve this, and so on. So I guess it's
Yeah, well, it's a level of consciousness and advancement to understand that situation, you know, how that's going on. And one with less faith, they're going to see it negatively, that I'm trying to be a devotee and Krishna's allowing this to happen, you know, and they lose their faith, you know, so that can happen.
Something, well, I can't remember the verse, but there's that famous verse, the one who's, can only approach, or could that one was Queen Kundi's spoken, but it's only somebody who is completely materially impoverished who can really pull out to Krishna and everything. So, I mean, that's pretty elevated.
Yeah, so that's a Kinchana Gochara, one who can approach Krishna who's materially exhausted. So she also said she was praying for the calamities to happen, because when they happen, then I can remember you. So it's it's not something that can be artificially, a level that you can artificially reach, but definitely on the higher levels, whatever happens, you understand this is Krishna's blessings, and actually I deserve more. All right, thank you very much. Prabhupada ki jai.